Okay, good morning, everyone, or I should say afternoon. Thank you for joining our Trade Quarter Enhancement Program workshop. My name is Hannah Walter. I'm the Program Manager for the Trade Quarter Enhancement Program. Let's start with some webinar logistic information. Kayla, would you mind running through that?
Sure, thanks, Hannah. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program Guidelines Development Workshop. Our workshops normally take place in different locations around the state. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to a webinar format. Please bear with us should we encounter any technical challenges. The workshop agenda is located under the Handouts tab and can be downloaded and saved during the webinar. It can also be found on the Commission's website. For participants joining us through GoToWebinar, please find the webinar panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio, question, and handouts tabs. Under the audio tab, you have the choice to listen in via the computer or telephone option. If you prefer computer audio, please select the appropriate box. If you prefer the phone call option, select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio PIN as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio PIN is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak should you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with any other participants as they are registered to a specific attendee. We welcome comments and questions from attendees as a part of each topic at this workshop. There will also be an opportunity for comments and questions at the end of the presentation. There are two options for participants to provide comments. You may click on the hand icon to indicate that you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Also, please use the raise hand feature as early into the topic as you can to give the system time to acknowledge you. You may also use the questions tab to submit a question or comment. Please type in the topic you are commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. You will not be able to be on camera while making comments. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you sharing your time and feedback with us. Back to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Kayla. Okay, so today what we're going to do is recap the equity meeting that was held in December. We'll follow up on the CEQA NEPA topic. We'll cover the nomination form, in other words, the application instructions, and then we'll talk about the regional corridor targets. So first, we're going to talk about the equity meeting in December, and for that, I'll turn it over to Matthew Yalscott.
Thank you, Hannah, and good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who have joined some of the other SB1 competitive program workshops, this might be a bit redundant, but for those of you that are joining us this afternoon for the Trade Quarter Enhancement Program workshop, I'm going to cover just a brief recap on the December 16th workshop we held on better incorporating transportation equity into our SB1 program guidelines. And Kayla, I do believe there was a specific, thank you very much. Okay. So I'll point out for those of you that were not able to attend the December 16th workshop that we recently got the recording of that workshop posted to our Commission workshop website. And during this workshop, Sequoia Erasmus, who's the Associate Deputy Director of Equity and Engagement at the Commission, did explore some key areas with attendees, and I'm going to recap some of that feedback with you today. Workshop attendees shared feedback on how they would meaningfully consider transportation equity in the SB1 programs, which included encouraging early communication, early community participation, in the planning process, adding community support as a criteria, and keeping the approach simple. During the workshop, we did utilize Slido, which is an online tool to anonymously solicit feedback in order to learn how other organizations and their partners incorporate equity into their own programs, projects, and metrics. Overall, workshop participants were in favor of a mixed approach to incorporate equity throughout the guidelines where applicable, in addition to a standalone section as it might also be applicable. We also heard consensus around the idea that flexibility in defining vulnerable communities within project applications was viewed as a positive thing. The following slide, so this existing slide and then the next slide, highlights some of our takeaways from the December 16th workshop. And so again, I will just briefly summarize some of the feedback that we received on this slide. So we heard to better involve community-based organizations and community participation overall early on in the process, to integrate equity into multiple places in the program guidelines, to prioritize community visions before a sponsor might plan a project, keep the approach simple, and to add community support as a evaluation criteria. And Kayla, you can move on to the next slide, please. And this slide includes some of the noted challenges that we heard and captured from attendees during the workshop, which were that there are funding constraints to properly address the depth of these types of issues, that localizing equity indicators within a region is a challenge, that there's a lack of historical data for rural or smaller communities, that there's an inability to fund community-based organization participation, that it's difficult to obtain political and overall general support behind some of these ideas, that the suburbs or suburban and rural areas have an inability to compete with the more urbanized areas, and that there may be a duplication of efforts by multiple agencies in the context of the same geographic area. So I will note that while these areas were vocalized as possible challenges by our attendees, the commission staff is still exploring ways to address them. And I want to say that these challenges will not necessarily prevent us from exploring the extent to which we can better incorporate equitable outcomes within the SB1 competitive programs this cycle. So that would be the local partnership program, the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, and the Trade Corridor Enhancement program, which you're all attending the workshop for today. So the specific feedback that we received during the December 16th workshop and continue to receive will be considered and synthesized into appropriate guidelines changes within each of the SB1 programs, and we'll be sharing that language, draft language publicly later on this spring. So probably in about a month or 2 months now at this point. I'll also say that we were encouraged by the attendance that we had and the feedback that we received during the workshop. And I continue to strongly encourage our stakeholders to follow along with these efforts as we proceed with draft guidelines in each of the SB1 programs. So just briefly, I'll say the next opportunity to discuss or hear about the incorporation of transportation equity in the SB1 competitive programs will actually be this Thursday, February 3rd, at the Equity Advisory Roundtable discussion that the Commission hosts. It will be an agenda item actually at the roundtable this Thursday. And we're also tentatively planning for a second standalone all SB1 competitive program workshop on better integrating transportation equity. And my guess is it will probably announce that shortly to take place sometime next month. So in the month of, or sorry, next month is still February. In the month after next, which would be March. Or it's January 31st. That's throwing me off. Apologies. So with that, unless there are any comments or questions today, I'll turn the presentation back over to Hannah to cover the remaining Trade Corridor Enhancement Program topics that she has for today.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. So does anyone have any comments or questions on that?
Hi, Hannah, it's Kayla. I'm not seeing any written questions at the moment and no hands raised.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
Thanks. Thanks, Matthew. Let's talk about CEQA NEPA. So this is a follow-up to a conversation that we had earlier, talking about the deadlines and what timeframes people needed and some new goals that the commission has for making the deadlines shorter for CEQA and NEPA. So this was kind of where we've landed. Oh yeah, first I put in this slide because I kind of wanted to go over what it meant to complete a project level environmental process. I found that term a little vague, and that's what the language in the guidelines, when it's talking about the 6-month deadline, it says that you must have completed a project level environmental process. And so what exactly does that mean? So what that means is that you have to have filed your notice of determination, and you have to have received board approval for your environmental document. So that's what that term means. Let me pause there really quick. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Hi, Hannah. We do have a hand raised, so I'll turn it to Celeste.
Sure.
Thanks, Kayla. First up is Carrie Cartwright.
Hi, Carrie.
Oh, hi, Hannah. No, actually, mine was for the subsequent slides pertaining to the deadline for CEQA and NEPA. And preceding that, because it's pertinent to those questions, what is the current anticipated program adoption, June to 2023?
Yeah, we're thinking, Matthew, is it August of 2023 that we're thinking?
So Carrie, if you're referring to the adoption of the actual program, which means following, getting applications and evaluating applications, and Hannah actually, sharing her staff recommendations, that would be June 2023. So a year from this June is when we're tentatively planning to bring the programs forward for commission approval. I think Hannah's mentioning August of 2022. So this current year is when we're planning to bring final guidelines for commission approval.
Right. That's what I was thinking.
And then I didn't see it in the handouts. Maybe you're going to talk about it subsequent to this, about when the applications would be due. Is that further on in your presentation?
Yeah, it is, but I'm thinking November or December of this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and I still have some questions on the deadline, so I'll wait till you get to pass those slides.
Okay, well, since you're on, just why don't you ask them, and then can you skip to the next slide?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've read ahead, and you still have the 6 months NEPA and CEQA post-program adoption.
Yeah.
The NEPA, I think, is going to be impossible for all the reasons I cited, and despite the hard work that you and Angel Powell have done, and Matthew, regarding ensuring that NHFP funds for off-system projects, since it's Title 23, still be handled by Caltrans. But the problem is, will headquarters require Caltrans to commence NEPA in advance of program adoption to make that 6 months? Because it's impossible for our districts to issue NEPA 6 months after program adoption. I had a nightmare process of a 3 or 4 months deliberation of even Caltrans taking it on the last time around for TSIP 2018. And then it was 18 months to get ultimately a CE that we should have had within a couple months. And that was even after asking folks, Omishakin specifically, can we get this cleared now? So the 6 months, I think, is impossible for Caltrans districts to issue the NEPA after program adoption if they haven't been required to start in advance of that. Program. So it would be a waste of time if funds are programmed, which is why they typically will not proceed until the funds are programmed, i.e. program adoption.
Yeah, and you weren't able to work that out with the Caltrans group that we kind of talked to offline.
Well, it's not a matter of working it out. It's a matter of how long it'll take them, time frame. The issue that was worked out is, yeah, they are responsible for it, so they will have to proceed in haste once the program is adopted. And for them to issue NEPA within 6 months, I think is, especially if there's much bigger on-system roadway projects, that's a bigger issue that maybe some agencies might not have started NEPA, although they probably should have, since it would be on a state highway, interstate. But for off-system, 6 months is probably not doable by the districts, at least our district, I don't think.
Okay. It seems like all I can tell you right now is 3 things. First, we given the conversations that the commission staff have had with our executive staff internally, there's not a lot of leeway I can bring to the table at this point about this, other than I can tell you that, if you want to put anything in writing again, I will pass that along. And, one thing I can take back, because we could talk about this more, is putting language in there that says that we'll consider granting time extensions, because right now there's not language in there about the commission granting time extensions for these deadlines, but I know that you had proposed that before, and that's something we haven't talked about as much, so I could still bring that back as an option. But in terms of, whether or not we have to have the 6-month deadline for NEPA, we've talked about that extensively, and I definitely understand your concerns and where you're coming from. I think this is where it's going to stay for now, though, based on those conversations. So,
I mean, it's unfortunate because at a minimum, I think it would behoove the headquarters to promulgate this to the districts so that they know and are aware that they're going to be required or asked to process NEPA, perhaps for off-system projects in 6 months. And it was a nightmare last time, as I said.
Hey, Hannah.
Yeah, Carrie, I'm going to ask my team to unmute Angel Pyle briefly. I think she was communicating with me that she has a response on behalf of the department.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay,
Angel,
I think
you're
I'm on. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Hey, Carrie. Hi, Matthew. Hi, Hannah.
Hi.
So, Carrie, I did have a conversation specifically with District 7 about what you're bringing up right now. And I apologize for the nightmare that you had however long ago. I am confident, based on the additional research and conversations that we've done, that nightmare will not happen again. Okay. I also think that we can have a more an offline conversation more focused on some of the projects that you're thinking about, okay, because those ones, I spoke with the district about this specifically, and I think that we can work something out to work with you to make sure that we meet the deadlines associated with TSEP. I do think it's going to require some additional conversations, and I am more than happy to facilitate those conversations and ensure that we are not any sort of barrier or anything like that with any of the projects that the port might be submitting.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then just as last week, I conveyed some of these issues to Tony Tavares, so he is aware of this.
Yes, absolutely. So I feel like we're going to be in a much better position to be able to support any projects where Caltrans would be the NEPA designated lead. And if you or anybody else, even in this workshop, feels like there's any issues there, I'm more than happy to take some of those and to carry that forward. So I feel confident that you will not have the experience in the future that might have happened previously.
Great. I greatly appreciate that and your effort, and Matthew and Hannah, your efforts as well. And so what I would do is we'll follow up accordingly with District 7. I think once we know which projects we're going to submit, which we're still identifying, and then also even once we submit, I think there'll be plenty of time to have those discussions. So thank you very much.
Okay, that works. If you could loop me into some of those discussions as well, because I know that sometimes, we have port projects and then there's port with rail, and some of that can get a little bit dicey, and I think that I can help with some of that. So please, and it's better if we can take a look at those things earlier rather than later. So,
Yes.
So I'm happy to help with that.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, we'll request that if you could even coordinate those and get this set up District 7, that would be great. So appreciate that.
Happy to help.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And so that was Angel Pyle talking from Caltrans, and if you are having any concerns with your CEQA NEPA deadlines, I would urge you to reach out to Angel or I or both of us as soon as you kind of realize that, so that we can do what we can to try to help with that process. Because the earlier that you notify us that something like that may be a concern, the more proactively we can try to help you address it. So please reach out to us if you ever have concerns if your project is programmed and then something comes up and you have a concern, then please let us know so we can work with you on it. And the other thing I wanted to say about these deadlines is that, you know, I know that right now everyone is focused on cycle 3, but when you start to put your projects in the pipeline for cycle 4 and on, I would not assume that you will be given 6 months for the CEQA NEPA deadline, because the deadlines could become even more strict in the future. It was viewed as a concession in a way to leave the 6 months in there. And so just don't plan on that 6 months always being there. You might need to start thinking about how to get your projects through environmental before requesting the trade corridor funding in the future. I don't know that for certain, but that might be how it ends up. So just a fair warning on that point. Okay, so let's move to the next slide.
Hannah, this is Kayla. We do have a couple more hands raised if you don't mind staying on this topic, and Celeste can unmute them.
Yeah, we can, but can you move to the next slide?
Oh, yes.
Because I actually want to move to the part that has the language in it. Keep going. Not that one. The next one, I think. There we go. Yeah, that slide. That slide has the new language in it. Okay.
All right, next up is Matt Davis.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just maybe following on Carrie's thing, and as a maybe more technical question, is that my understanding from our CEQA staff here is that if we have a project that's categorically exempt from CEQA, we wouldn't approve an environmental document per se. We would reference that it's exempt from the CEQA sort of study because of the nature of it not having a material significant environmental impact whenever we take a project action. So, and also we would file a notice of exemption, not a notice of determination. So I'm just wanting to note that maybe you want to clarify that.
No, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, you're right. And the guidelines don't specifically, maybe the reason they don't get into specifics is because of that, because there's different scenarios. But when you file your notice of exemption, I think that would be like a similar point in the process as when you file your notice of determination, correct?
So yeah, I mean, again, the notice of exemption would be filed just to the extent that when our board takes any action on a project as defined under CEQA, then we have to, you know, make the finding of how it would be categorically exempt. And so that's when we would file a notice of exemption, which would reduce any challenge period to 35 days.
Okay.
But it's not, what I'm saying, it's not a standalone. There's no document. You know, we would obviously do the technical analysis and the findings to justify that, but there isn't like, you don't have an environmental report, I guess is what I'm saying. It's not like an EIR.
I'm thinking, so does CEQA, does the state send you any kind of like confirmation or approval of that? Like if they find or agree that it's exempt, or does Caltrans have delegated authority to kind of approve it as exempt?
I mean, to the extent this may be a distinction without a difference, just because, you know, obviously, just like Carrie's points, I mean, if Caltrans is reasonably confident that, you know, we can expedite the review, I mean, we can probably make sure that we have any sort of determination that we would do in conjunction, you know, if it's state nominated or regionally nominated. So as long as we just have the reasonable assurance, because, you know, again, if you don't file a notice, then obviously the statute of limitations is like 6 months. So we would want to file whatever notice would be appropriate for the purposes of the CTC.
Yeah, well, I think that is how we have allowed we have allowed you, if I understand it correctly, and I'm still familiarizing myself with all of the CEQA process. That's why I actually asked Jose Osagara to be on this call at this time so that he can provide some additional guidance if needed. But as I understand it, in the past, we have allowed applicants to submit, to basically state in their application that they have submitted a notice of categorical exemption, and we've accepted that in the past. So I would say that that is allowable.
Yes, Hannah, and this is Jose Oseguera, and sorry to interrupt. And that is, you are correct. And in particular here, I think the question is the lead agency. The lead agency needs to certify that they are categorically exempt and need to file accordingly. So that's what would need to take place. And I believe what has just been stated is that is what the local agency would be pursuing.
Perfect. Okay, and then just does the inclusion of federal funding mandate that all projects will have to get a NEPA approval, or just for ones that have federal funding attached to them?
And that is an excellent question, and that is any time that federal dollars are involved, a NEPA certification will need to be pursued. So again, when federal dollars are involved, that's the key. That's when we're going to have to clear NEPA as well.
Okay, and I'm sorry to take up the group's time, but maybe this gets into it, but by having a federal dollars included, does that include all federal contracting and procurement provisions, including Buy America?
Anytime again that the stream of money includes federal dollars, then we have to have that certification that it has cleared NEPA. And I am sorry, as I am speaking, I got a telephone call but I just muted that. But nonetheless, yes, anytime that federal dollars are involved in the funding stream, we need to clear that we need to have that NEPA clearance involved.
Thanks.
Yeah, because there's federal funds that are specific to part of the trade corridor program. But like Jose said, even if there's a different federal funding source on the project that's not that trade corridor federal funding source, it still is going to require NEPA. Okay, thanks, Jose. Does anyone else have any other questions for Jose while we have him here?
Hey, Hannah, we have Carrie Cartwright.
Hey, Carrie.
They just put their hand down. It might have been accidental.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, here, they raised his hand again. Here he is. Carrie, you're unmuted.
Okay, sorry about that. Just as an FYI, so Hannah, we can take this offline because there'll be even more unique circumstances. Angel is aware of this as well, whereby a port entity that receives USDOT, now it's actually in the IIJA, Port Infrastructure Development Program funds that are administered by the Maritime Administration, and we'll have to work with them to try and get them to change their process because they, in fact, wouldn't accept our NEPA and perform their own NEPA for two different TSIP cycle 2020 projects, where we already had NEPA cleared by Caltrans for a highway project, and they insisted on doing their own EA FONSI. But after about a year, they issued a CE, categorical exclusion, which is more insanity at the federal level. So
Yeah.
There may be some special circumstances for ports, not just us, that will absolutely need an extension for NEPA just because of that.
Yeah, I was going to say that's another reason why we might want to consider adding an extension language, because with all the IIJA dollars coming in and trying to make sure that we're taking as much advantage of those as we can, I agree that we might want to consider adding in some extension language. So let me go back and ask that question, and if we do add it in, I'll get back to you and I'll let people know.
Okay, I think that would be good to have that clarifying, qualifying language in there. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you, and thanks, Jose, for helping me answer that question.
No problem whatsoever,
Yeah.
Hannah. And I just wanted to reiterate, and that is that in regards to many of the local agencies, typically everyone's on top and they move forward with securing all the different requirements that they need to fulfill in order to meet the the funding requirements that will need to be complied with for any type of NEQA certification that takes place. But just a reminder, make sure that that process is in place, because if local agencies wait till the last minute to secure their NEPA, that's really going to put them in a predicament in terms of getting the approvals in order for them to move forward with any of the allocations. So again, just make sure you start early if you know that there is federal dollars involved in your funding stream. So that's the only thing that I wanted to point out.
Okay, yeah, no, good point. Thank you. The one other thing I'll point out on this slide is that we added the word design into the language. So as we discussed before, we've taken the ability to fund PA and ED or planning and environmental document. That phase we've taken out. So in cycle 3, trade corridors won't fund that phase, but the other phases, design, right-of-way, and construction, will all be subject to this 6-month deadline for both CEQA and NEPA. So we wanted to make sure that that was clear, and we added language in the guidelines to reflect that. Okay, so we can move on. Are there any other questions on this? Yeah.
Yes, there's 2 more hands. Angel.
Hey, Hannah, this is Angel. So the first, I'll have to take maybe a couple of questions back on the CEQA process with your first slide, just to make sure that I understand, but I'll take that offline. But I did want to thank you, and I wanted to thank the commission for being flexible on NEPA and continuing to allow that within 6 months of program adoption. So I think that allowing that is helpful. So I appreciate your flexibility there, and I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Oh yeah, thank you, Angel. Thank you for being good partners with us as we try to work on this.
Sure, and we'll be in touch on the CEQA part, because I need to go back and just do some double checking with some of our subject matter experts on that. And then also thank you for the heads up in terms of maybe future cycles and maybe needing to be prepared earlier. So thanks.
Yeah.
All right, there's one more hand. Marcella Renzi, you are unmuted.
Good afternoon. Thank you again, Hannah, for continuing to work on these complicated subjects. I just wanted to add a little bit to the discussion on federal modal agencies not accepting each other's requirements. We've had that happen between FHWA and FTA as well. I'm just providing that as an information point that might be helpful for commissioners and commission staff when they consider the need for extensions.
Okay, I'll take that back, and I appreciate that comment. And one thing to remember as well is that anyone has the ability to comment to the commission directly as well. So when I present these guidelines in their draft form to the commission in, I forget when I'm going to do that, sometime in the summer of this year, you will have the ability to make any comments you would like on the draft guidelines. So if you feel that you still have some outstanding concerns that you'd like the commission to consider related to anything, including the CEQA NEPA deadlines, then you can feel free to make your comments in that forum in the commission meeting as well. Just a reminder that that's also another place where you're free to voice your concerns. So just wanted to remind people of that.
Hannah, this is Kayla. We do have one written question before we move on.
Sure.
So this person asked, has there been additional discussion regarding the TCEP match requirement? For a rural agency like Mono County LTC, this is a big lift financially.
We did discuss that a lot, and the end result of those discussions was that because in the original precursor to trade corridors program, there was actually a 100% match, and well, there was a 100% match required, And then in trade corridors, it was lowered to 30% as a in recognition of sometimes the difficulty in getting some of the capital for some of these projects, especially for the smaller rural areas. But since the match was already lowered to 30%, there wasn't, you know, the ultimate decision was to just leave it at 30% for now. So right now it's still at 30%.
Thanks, Hannah. That was it.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, that's just a recap that the CEQA requirement is the same and the NEPA got changed to be 6 months from program adoption. The other programs had it like that already for NEPA, but I had changed it in cycle 2 to be at the time of allocation, but now it's essentially getting changed back to at the time of 6 months program adoption. So now it's like that for both CEQA and NEPA. Okay, so let's talk about the nomination form. So for people who might not be familiar with the nomination form, these are basically the application instructions. I feel like this is a good time to go over it with everyone because I'm assuming that you're probably starting to think about writing your applications now. And I'm hoping that this can be as useful as possible. Just so you know, I put a lot of time and thought into trying to make this form as simple and easy to use as I could. So during my review of the cycle 2 projects, I started a list of issues and things we might want to clarify, and I used that to inform the nomination form that I rewrote for cycle 3. So if you don't have a copy of that language, because I sent it around to a few of you before this meeting, if I had your email in a group, but there's no, I don't keep the list that the listserv that Doug Remedios does for getting notifications out to you all. But, and this language is not yet on the website and it is in draft form. But if you don't already have a copy of the draft language, then Kayla has added it to the meeting as a handout. So you should be able to access it in your pane over on the right. It says draft nomination form, TSIP cycle 3. So if you don't already have it, I would encourage you to click on that document and download it, because if you're starting to work on your application, you'll want to use this version and not the version in cycle 2. Okay, so let's talk about the beginning of the form. So the first thing that you're going to see in the nomination form attachment is some instructions about MPO letters. A metropolitan planning organization is like an umbrella planning organization that represents a group of counties in the state. And most of you are familiar with who your MPO is, but if you're not, you need to first find out what MPO would represent your county or city. And so to do that, you can either Google MPO map and you should be able to, one should come up, or you can email me and I will send you a copy of an MPO map. So for applicants, if you're going to submit an application, you need to get in contact with your MPO and you need to let them know, because even though you'll be emailing us, or if it's a joint project, you'll be emailing Caltrans the application directly, and that's fine, but you still need to let your MPO know, because before the applications are due, the MPO needs to submit a letter that lists all the nominations that they've received for their area, and a statement about whether or not the applications are consistent with their regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy. So since they need to submit that letter before applications are due, it's important that you reach out to them ahead of time and let them know that you're planning to submit an application so you can work with them to get that included. So that's kind of my feedback for applicants in general. For MPOs, please plan on submitting your letter around end of September, beginning of November, because that will be before the actual application due date, but late enough in the process that people should know whether or not they're actually submitting an application. And so what the letter needs is a list of the nominations. If your members have worked out amongst themselves any priority order, then please include that priority. And then also a statement about whether it's consistent with the RTPSDS, like I said. And if you don't know if it's consistent, then please just say that. Or if it is, you can say that, then say that. But one way or another, you need to make a statement about the applications that are listed in the letter and their consistency with the RTPSDS. Okay, does anyone have any question on that before we move on?
Hi, Hannah,
Okay.
it's Kayla. I'm not seeing any written questions or hands raised at the moment.
Okay, let's move on. So good news is that you don't have to submit a paper copy this year. You can just email an electronic copy. And as in the past, try to limit your application to 35 pages, not counting the attachments, and follow the lettering convention in the instructions. So the nomination form has everything like lettered out. You need to follow those letters and those headers because it makes it a lot easier for us to review that way. So please follow those. Okay, next slide. The cover letter, what I'll say about the cover letter is that we actually use these a lot. Sometimes we give them to, oh, well, no, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm thinking of the fact sheet. Okay, the cover letter is just, that's what has the signature of your, the person who is officially submitting the application, and it's kind of a general overview of the application. It can be very short, and you address it to our executive director. I'll move on. Okay, this is what I was thinking of. So the fact sheet, this is what we give to the legislative staff sometimes when they're asking about a project. We also share it with our executive staff when we start to have our meetings with them when we're talking about all the projects. So it really is important that it be as good as possible. I put a couple of examples for you on the Trade Corridor webpage. So if you want, you can go look at those. But try to do a good job of making a visualization or including a map of the project and of stating what the benefits of the project are, and like the really high level key points, like what's your total ask, because we use those a lot, and so it will be some of the first information that some people see, or for some people some of the only information that they ever really read about your project. So try to make it good. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so this part, I felt like there was a lot of redundancy in the application for cycle 2, and I took a lot of it out because I'm trying to make it as easy and short as possible for you all, especially since we added some new project information areas in this time. So this is an attempt at sort of scaling down the information that you're required to provide at the beginning. So for overview, it's a brief 1 to 3 paragraph non-technical description of your project, a map of the project location, if it's a one in a series of projects that are prioritized from your entity, then include the priority. For scope, it should not be more than 2 to 3 paragraphs. And it should not say the same thing that the overview said. So if the overview could just be 1 paragraph that says what the project does in a really short way. The scope should have, what I like in the scope to see are like the list of the outputs, things like that. So it's a little more technical and specific to the actual pieces of the project. If you're going to list out the outputs, make sure they match the outputs in your PBR. You have to say that the project has independent utility. So just explain why it has independent utility. If you can explain why the project has independent utility in 3 sentences, then you only need 3 sentences. It doesn't have to be long. And then even though the MPO letter should state this, you need to state in the application that your project is consistent with the RTP-SCS, because that is a requirement for funding under the program. I'll pause really quick. Any questions so far?
Hi, Hannah. No questions or hands raised at the moment.
Okay, let's keep going. Oh yeah, and one more piece in the general information. So if the person who nominated the project or is submitting the application is different than the person who's going to be implementing the project, then there needs to be a written agreement in place between those two, and you need to state that in the general information. So you can just make it one sentence saying that, but just make sure you state that. Okay, screening criteria. So for eligible projects, you want to briefly explain why your project is eligible. And for this, I would just say you do not need to meet all of the eligibility criteria to be eligible. You just need to meet one of the eligibility criteria to be eligible. So right now it's section 11 in the trade quarter guidelines that talk about eligibility for the trade quarter program. You just need to fit under one of those categories. So just pick, if your project is eligible for more than one, I would recommend, although I'm not saying you have to do this, that you just pick like the top one or two and just talk about that. Does not need to be a long section there. Okay, we can keep going. Okay, project delivery. This is one of the key parts to the application, in my opinion, and one that I really struggled to feel like I was really getting a good sense of in cycle 2. So I tried to redraft it to ask for stuff that I thought might make it clear to me. And so I'm trying to get a sense of where your project is in the process and kind of like what's the project readiness level. And so these are the things that I'm asking for. The delivery method, that was already there before. What contracts are you entering into for the delivery of the project? And keep in mind that if you, right now, there's a rule that we can only have one project per allocation. So if you're requesting construction funds, you only can have one contract for those funds under at least the traditional delivery method. And then what are your schedule risks? Usually it's good if you have a table that for like this would be a good thing to have. A table that says what your schedule risk is on the left and then what your mitigation for that risk is on the right. So all projects have schedule risks, and so that's fine. But how are you planning to mitigate those risks? Hopefully, you've thought that through and can include that in the application. And then rail company coordination. So if your project is requiring coordination with a rail company, what does that look like? If they have to review your design, then what percent design are you and where are they in their review process? That's what I'm looking for there. And then where are you at with your CEQA NEPA? So that's where you would say that you've met the 6-month deadline and where you're at with that, you'd put that there. Okay, let me pause. Are there any questions so far?
Hi, Hannah. No questions or hands raised at the moment.
Okay. So let's talk about evaluation criteria. Okay, evaluation criteria. A couple of things up front. One is that some of these evaluation criteria are almost verbatim from the statute that governs the program. So if you look at the words in the guidelines, they're very close to what is in the Streets and Highways Code 2192. Other of the criteria are ones that have been added in as priorities that are not in the statute, but they were just added in later as a priority for the program. So this list is kind of a mix of both. And the other nuance is that some of these criteria are also performance metrics. And the way that one of the things, there was a whole workshop process about the performance metrics, and I'm planning to talk about the performance metrics in the next workshop to go over the guidebook with you. But one of the reasons that we decided to make something a metric is if it was pretty easy to quantify and there was a formula that in general would apply to like most types of projects, then we would make it a performance metric. But if it's a little less straightforward and there might be a lot of different ways that you would want to quantify the information, then we didn't make it a performance metric. So that's kind of just, there are criteria in here that are not performance metrics, but some of them are also performance metrics. So there's instructions, there's a list of evaluation criteria in the guidelines. And for the new criteria, there's instructions about what we're looking for. But for your application, you'll want to go through each of these, list them out. For example, you'll list under freight system factors, that's like a heading. You would list throughput and then you would talk about throughput. So you'll want to list each one out and then talk about it. If it's a performance metric, you need to at least include the metric in there in that paragraph. And then you can have a narrative explaining the metric. So that's the evaluation criteria section. That's important because in addition to the performance metric information itself, that's where we go to look at your explanation for how your project is doing a good job meeting the criteria in the guidelines that we're using to score the project on. Oh, I forgot to say that under the last slide, there's a new criteria. We've talked about it before. It's zero emission infrastructure. So that's a new one. Okay, and then all I'll point out on this one is there's a new criteria of equity under community impact factors. Okay, these are so everything else you're likely familiar with if you've submitted an application in the past, but these areas are what we're calling other project information areas. So they're not criteria. We're not scoring your project on these areas, but they're just pieces of information that we're asking for. And we've talked about them in past workshops, but they're accessibility, climate change, resilience and adaptation, protection of natural and working lands, and enhancement of the built environment, and public health. So those are things we want you to submit information on, but not that we're not scoring your project on. Okay, and then funding and deliverability. I tried to make this section a little easier. I included a table that you can use with information because we don't need that much information in this part about the funding because you have a PPR. So but it is good for a big picture. So I just included a template table you can use to fill out. So you can use that, make sure your required match is clear and include the total project cost in this section. Okay, yeah, here's where you want to talk about any cost overruns. If you need more than one contract for some reason, you'll want to talk about that here. If you are only asking for pre-construction funds, then explain how you're going to fund construction in the future. If you have federal grants that you've either received already or applied for, then explain that in this section. And if there are any ineligible elements of a project, like for example, for sure that something that you're doing in the project isn't eligible for trade corridors, then you would want to talk about that in this section. Okay, this one is going to probably be more important in this cycle than it has been in the past. But the reason we have this in here is because the public-private benefits language is that if a project is on private property with limited public access, or if it has for some reason like really significant private benefits, then what we're asking that you do is fill out a benefit cost analysis that compares the public benefits to the private benefits, because we're not supposed to fund the way it's worded is that the level of public funding should be commensurate or equal to the level of public benefit of the project. And so that's what we're trying to figure out. This has come up more lately, so let me give you a status update. So we've been talking with Caltrans about what are the limitations of our state funds in this program, and what kind of private projects could we fund with state funds under trade corridors. We don't have a final answer yet. Legal is still looking into it, but when we do get a final answer, I will share that with the group. For now, if you have a project that you believe is a freight infrastructure project that has significant public benefits, then even if it has significant private benefits as well, I would encourage you to submit the application, but be prepared to quantify the benefits in this section so we can review them. And when you're doing the benefit cost analysis, you are allowed to incorporate less traditional areas of benefit than maybe you have in the past. And some examples of these from Carrie Cartwright are like fossil fuel reduction, elimination, savings, the reduced costs and emissions associated with the production of diesel fuel at refineries, reduced emission and industry costs associated with the transportation of diesel fuel, direct emissions reductions. I think the Cal BC model already quantifies those benefits, so you could use those. Reduced equipment O&M costs, and improved safety for like e-trucks and cargo handling equipment. So those are just some examples of maybe some non-traditional benefits that you might want to include in the benefit piece of the equation for these kind of projects if you're doing this kind of analysis. But or if you're doing an analysis where you don't need to compare the public and the private benefits, but it's a zero emission infrastructure project, so you don't have as many of the traditional like benefits associated with traffic time savings. If it's something like that, then you'll also want to think about including some things like that into the benefit portion of your cost benefit analysis. I was kind of assuming that a lot of the projects where we'll have this question are the zero emission infrastructure type project. But I guess it's conceivable that you could have a zero emission infrastructure project that wasn't necessarily on private property or with significant private benefits. You could have one on public property. So, but in either case, you would still want to consider how you could quantify the benefits of the project, since it's less traditional, less like the ones we've seen in the past. Anyway, okay, I'll stop there. Does anyone have any questions on that section?
Hi, Hannah. We have a few hands raised, so I'll turn it to Celeste.
Okay.
Thanks, Kayla. Carrie Cartwright, you are unmuted.
So quickly, Hannah, I just want to verify that you did state a matching of the monetized value of public benefit to the TSEP request. So even though I don't know if it's stated that specifically in your guidelines thus far, maybe once you get to the CTC adoption, but say, for example, a project that has a 1.0 benefit cost, then theoretically, if they're providing the minimum matching of 30%, then 70% of the benefits would have to be a public nature for that application, if in fact you will be looking at absolute values for your assessment. And so is that correct, that you'll be they must match for absolute values, or you'll just consider that? How close do they match?
I'll just consider it, because we've never been that specific in the past, and I'm not planning on making it like that. The language I was putting about commensurate level of value, I believe that in the past that there's been a sentence saying that in the funding restrictions section of the guidelines. So it's kind of like a general statement. But yeah, I'm not going to make it very specific.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Jennifer Farinas. You're unmuted.
Hi, Hannah. Are you able to hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I had a question on slide H, specifically related to contracts. I was just wondering what you meant by if more than one contract's needed, two separate allocations being there. Because when we deliver projects, you might know, Caltrans, for their support costs, they'll like segregate those so we don't see funding associated with that. Or if we're working on a rail project, we'll have separate contracts for like flagging support or other needs. So I'm just wondering what was meant by that bullet.
Oh, right. That's a good question. And also, the contract piece is also kind of related to the way that things are budgeted. So I might need Angel to like step in, or I might need to get back to you. But the guidelines say that unless it's a Caltrans nominated project, the entity does not need to separate out support and capital costs. So if Caltrans isn't submitting the application on your behalf, then you don't even need to worry about the difference between support and capital outlay. If Caltrans is submitting it, then I don't believe that that's the kind of different contract that we're referring to, because even though you typically will have a support and capital outlay budget for the projects, that's actually okay. And we can separate both of those things out in the same vote box, like when it gets onto the CTC meeting agenda. But I think that what we're talking about is, for example, for a traditional delivery method, if you have a construction contract for a project, then there's one allocation for that construction contract. And if you end up entering into a separate contract, you split off a piece of the work, or you decide to do a different mode under a different contract, that's when we would need to know about it, because it might end up needing to be like programmed separately as a separate request.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Yeah, we had that happen under SECP, so I see what you mean.
Okay. And Angel, if you're still on, can you confirm that I'm saying that correctly? That's your understanding, right? That's how it works, I think.
Yes, ma'am, you're spot on. I have nothing more to add, but certainly as soon as I say that, there's going to be some sort of exception. So as soon as I say that, I know. So if anybody listening has any questions, each situation and each project is of course unique. So if there's anything special or anything like that, feel free to either reach out to your district counterparts, or you can also reach out to me and we can help get that clarified if necessary. So thank you, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you, Angel. Okay. All right, so then this next part is just, this has been in here for the last 2 cycles as well, but if your project is on the state highway system, then you need to have evidence of cooperation between the nominating agency and Caltrans. And so that there is actually a form that you fill out for that, that is an attachment to the application. And I'll note that in the performance metrics guidebook that we'll talk about next week, for the VMT portion, VMT is actually not a trade corridor performance metric, but for solutions for congested corridors and local partnership, for your change in VMT, if it's on system, then you will need to fill that form out and use it to note that Caltrans is concurring with the way you calculated VMT. So just so you know, that form is has a dual purpose for those 2 programs for cycle 3. And then bulk, coal, and reversible lanes, those have to do with sections in law. And it's basically just that we don't want to fund projects that are going to transport coal, and I'm probably going to get that statement wrong, but it's spelled out right there in the government code. And we want you to have done a reversible lanes analysis. So if it's a capacity increasing project, we want to know that it was considered for reversible lanes, and that's also pursuant to the Streets and Highways Code. But okay, I think that's it. I actually think that's the end of that. Okay, yes, that's the end. So are there any other questions on the nomination form before we move on?
Hey, Hannah. I guess I have the luxury of just turning my camera on rather than raising my hand. There was one, just to clarify, there was one item on the prior slide, Kayla, if you wouldn't mind just backing up one slide. And I apologize, it's my fault for not catching this. Everything Hannah said is absolutely correct about that top bullet, the interagency cooperation. But we're actually not going to put the onus on applicants to develop, what that type of coordination looks like. We're actually, and I say we as in my team in Caltrans is actually developing kind of like an official form that can be completed so that it's hopefully straightforward and it lets what's necessary in terms of getting that justification submitted to the commission. And so we'll be kind of finalizing that form and bringing that to a workshop later on. So just to call out, anytime I think we leave something open to interpretation and we can make it a bit more of a process to follow, it's probably better. So just clarifying.
Well, actually, I have a question. So, wait, do you mean that in order to kind of demonstrate interagency coordination in general, you're making a form, or like for change in VMT, you're making a form, or both?
The change in VMT. So so it not necessarily just interagency cooperation or anything along those lines, but it would be for the performance metric on VMT, and then I believe the other programs. It's not just TSEP. It's SCCP and LPP have required forms. I believe it's like a CTC 0001 or something, and so it'll be kind of an update to that form.
Okay, yeah, that's the form I was actually referring to. So you're going to update that form to make sure it covers that, right?
Correct.
Okay, sounds good. And just to reiterate, there is no change in VMT metric for trade corridors. So that's just, you
Correct.
Still have to fill out that form for trade corridors, but you don't have to worry about the change in VMT part. Thanks, Matthew.
And I'll turn it back over to other questions. Sorry.
No, thank you for clarifying. Okay, so unless there's any more questions on the nomination form, let's talk about the regional corridor targets.
Hi, Hannah. No hands raised and no questions at the moment.
Okay, so for the regional corridor targets, first of all, this only applies to the regional portion of the funds. So all the federal and state trade corridor funds are all lumped into one pot of money. And then whatever that number is split out 60-40. The targets are not on the 40% for Caltrans projects or Caltrans nominated projects. It's only applicable to the 60% for the region, the regional funds. So that's the part that the targets apply to. And then second, they really are not caps as far as the commission is concerned. They are not we can program above or below the targets. They're just guidelines. And the only reason that we do them is so that we can try to have some form of like geographic equity in the state. We don't want to give all of our money to just one part. We want to look at what we're awarding and make sure that we're kind of spreading it out through the state. So that's why we have those targets as kind of like a benchmark or measure when we're making decisions about funding, that we can consider the whole state, but we can approve funds that are above or below them. So the way that we developed the targets was that I liked the process. I felt like on the whole it was positive. I hope people on that work group agreed. But it was like a 6-month process, and we looked at different measures of freight need in each region. So the state's divided up roughly into like 5 different regions. Freight regions. We looked at indicators of freight needs like truck VMT, daily vehicle hours of delay, customs value of imports and exports. We added a disadvantaged community measure this year, but this is the first time that these targets have been updated since the cycle 1, and in cycle 1 they were based on data from 2003 to 2005, so they were based on very old information, and most of the data years we used for the update is 2019, because in comparing pre and post COVID data, we found that there was not a significant fluctuation between 2019 and 2020 or 2021. So we decided, and 2019 was the most complete year of data that we had in general for our data sets. So we went with 2019. But that's kind of an overview of the process we use to update the targets. So let's look at the targets. Okay, here they are. So for the Bay Area, Central Valley, that's a dash, not a negative symbol. It's 29% of the total regional funds. That's actually a 2% increase. For the Central Coast, 2.5%, so that's a 0.5% increase. LA Inland, 56%, that's actually a 2% decrease. The other region, which is a lot of the counties in the north part of the state, that's 2.5% or a 0.5% increase. And for San Diego, the San Diego border region, that 10%, that's a 1% decrease. So those are the targets. That's how they ended up. Don't really have anything else to say. I'll just take any questions or comments that people might have.
Hi, Hannah. We do have a hand raised, so I'll turn it to Celeste.
Thanks, Kayla. Carrie Cartwright, you are unmuted. Oh. Okay, you're unmuted.
Hannah, I'm going to kind of throw out something that probably will be considered radical, but that's just my nature. And I'm going to state this at this stage in your guidelines development only because it's precipitated by IIJA. So the NHFP funds for multimodal now has up to 30% that can be allocated to non-highway projects. Mm-hmm. Since it's a substantial more amount, not only in percentage but also absolute dollars for this 5-year program, I would like to request that Caltrans and CTC consider taking those funds, or maybe a high portion of those funds, off the top and not subject to the 60-40 split. And because they are off system, allocate them automatically on top of the 60-40 split to the regions. And in the past cycle, those 10% of funds, which is how Caltrans sponsors some of the projects, because it's no loss to them because they're off system. And not to say that we don't want Caltrans sponsorship, but I think because there's more funds available now, that, you know, I think that should be considered, that they're really off the top and up, subject to the split between the state, which is primarily going to be highway projects and
Yeah.
the regional projects. So
That's a good idea, and that's a good idea, but we can't do that officially because I remember the statute and it clearly says the 40-60 split in there in the statute. And the way that's written is that the very first section of the bill or of the statute is like talking about both of the funding pots together, and then after that, except for when it refers to the state dollars being subject to Article 19, it's kind of referring them together, and then it says that the program funds have to be split 40-60. So I don't think we can do that because then it would be making it more like 70-30 or whatever. I'm just like, that's not really, but you know.
So the language implicitly requires the 40-60 split for all SB1 program funds, and it does cite NHFP funds in there in the statute. I don't recall.
Yeah, it requires the 40-60 split, and I don't think it specifically restates it, but what I mean is from where it's located in the bill, it's like referring back to those two pots. But if you want, I can send you the language so you can see it. And it's definitely something that we could, just take into consideration when we're, reviewing our recommendations for funding for these projects, because you have a point in what you're saying. So we can still consider it like that, even if we don't put anything official on paper.
Okay, I didn't realize that that the requirement applied to both types of funds.
Well, let me send you the language on the side, and then you can tell me if you think that's not.
Okay.
Also, Hannah and Carrie, so this is Angel. Sorry to kind of butt in. So just so that you guys are both aware, so the state share has, if Caltrans is a partner in the application, there are many times that we still do, and we even encourage a 40-60 split. So there are state share funds that are on off-system projects or applied to off-system projects. So I don't know if that kind of helps the conversation at all, but I can tell you that not all of 100% of the state share does not go solely on the state highway system, just so.
Yeah, but the problem, the reason the off system is that Article 19 applies even for the state funds, state highway count. So technically, any off system share that Caltrans or any share they're giving up, say for non-highway projects, really are the NHFP funds that they're given a portion of, essentially. So they're given 40% of the amount, and last time it was only 60 million, so it was a tiny amount. So it gets a little convoluted if you're considering the state regional share versus the NHFP and NHFP multimodal. So yeah.
Well, actually, in the last cycle, we made the determination that we could use the state funds for port and rail projects, and we programmed it like that. So technically, yeah.
Not
right.
Not state highway funds, because it's Article 19 precludes that.
So we actually did use some state funds for some of those projects last year, and we had some internal conversations about that with Caltrans, and felt like the projects that we funded with state funds met the definition of the Article 19 requirements. So we did actually use some of the state funds for the port and rail projects last year. We did do.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's very intriguing to know, because we've been fighting that battle for years. If you could provide those projects where you did apply state highway count funds, because I would definitely like to know that for future reference in our applications.
Okay, what I can do is, I think one of our program of projects, the one that might be posted online now, shows which ones are federalized. So you'll be able to see all the projects we funded with state funds, and just from looking at the titles, you can tell that some of them are port and rail projects. Yeah.
That's quite bizarre. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
there's language that's in Article 19 that allowed for some of that. So we can also share what the government code is as well, because we made sure that we were still compliant with Article 19 and all applicable provisions before we made that decision. So.
Okay, thanks, Angel. Because I know there's some language in an amendment that was done a number of years ago. It says if provides for mitigation of the state highway system, it's eligible, which is the argument we were trying to make with on-dock rail. It reduces truck trips on the state highway system. And we were also, no, it doesn't fly, but it sounds like you guys have reinterpreted it from when we had sought interpretation several years ago.
Sure, I can get the government code and share that as well, the one that we utilized for it. So.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep, no problem.
For logistics, I'm gonna put together the statute governing the program that has the 40/60 split language and the most recent program and projects, and then I'll coordinate with you so we can just send one email.
Oh, that sounds perfect. Okay, I'll get that and then send it over to you so it's one response. So okay, thanks.
All right, so are there any other comments about the regional corridor targets?
Hi, Hannah. No questions or hands raised at the moment.
Okay. Well, that concludes our workshop for today, and I thank you all for participating. In the next workshop, my primary topic is going to be the performance metrics guidebook, which is now done, I'm happy to say. And thank you to everyone who contributed so much to getting that thing done. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for, oh yes, go ahead.
Sorry, we have a hand raised, so I'll turn it to Celeste.
Okay.
Thank you, Kayla. Akiko Yamagami, you are unmuted.
Hi, Akiko.
Akiko, I believe you are self-muted.
Thank you for the reminder. I was talking. Hi, Hannah. This is Akiko Yamagami from LA Metro. I do have a question about the topic that wasn't covered in today's workshop, but I do think it was covered in previous workshop. Can I ask you the question? It was about scope changes.
Sure, yeah.
So could you actually refresh my memory, like what we collectively decided for the TSEP upcoming cycle 3, whether we are going to maintain the same language that was in the 2020 guidelines on scope changes, which said I'll just read it. The Commission will not consider changes to the scope of the project unless the change is minor and has no impact to the project benefits, or the scope change increases the benefits of the project. Is it kept as is, or did we have different language for the cycle 3?
I can't remember. So bear with me one second. I'm actually pulling it up. My draft. Look at what I wrote here. I think the part that you're looking at is kind of near the end when it's talking about changes, right?
Yeah, I think it was the project amendments.
Okay, all right. Bear with me while I take a look here. After we go over the performance metric form, we'll have covered the main parts of the guidelines, and then a little bit after that, at some point, I guess my point is that I'll be sending the group a copy of the draft guidelines, and the new language is probably going to be highlighted in red. I have to see what works best for our accessibility rules, and then and that way you guys can see all of it together, because we've just been talking about it in pieces. Oh, Matthew, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I think, Akiko, were you asking if we had made any prior changes or suggested changes to our scope change process, or we will be in cycle 3?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I figured at this point, if you did, you probably presented it in previous workshops, but
Yeah, no, and I can say, because Hannah's been, I think, inundated with specific changes, but we've not been considering changing our scope change policy in TCEP or in the other SB1 competitive programs. I know, I think the wording that Hannah just read back, which is, we will consider minor scope changes or changes that don't impact project benefits, will remain in place for cycle 3. And so if there are requests from stakeholders to consider changes to that language, we'll certainly entertain the conversation. But I can say right now, we have no internal proposal to change what we had from cycle 1 or from cycle 2.
okay, thank you. That's good.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to point out that right now my draft language says the commission may not consider changes to the scope of the project unless the change is minor and has no impact on project benefits. So that's how it reads at this point in time.
Oh, change from will to may. Okay, yeah, I think that sounds good. You might be wondering who I talked to internally at Metro, but there was a question and discussion that were brought up. It wasn't on TCEP guideline language, but it had to do with other programs. And I just didn't realize like how often change orders happen when we actually go into construction phase. So I just wanted to make sure that within, especially for those projects that receive TCEP funding, I didn't want it to be a challenge down the road. So I think this all sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Thank you, Akiko. There is one more hand raised, Hannah. Paul Krupka, sure. You are unmuted. Paul, you may be self-muted.
Sorry about that. Hannah, thank you so much, and the whole group, thank you so much. One quick question. You mentioned that the performance measurement methodology guidebook was in final form, I believe. And is that available on the website yet?
Oh, that's a good point. We need to put it there. So I'll work with my web team to get it posted. And then yes, we don't have it up there yet, but we should do. So I'll work with them to get that out.
So, and that's going to be the subject
you might have to get
the next workshop.
Right.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. No, that's a good point. I need to make a note of that because you might need to give them a little bit of time to put it into, there's some accessibility rules we have to follow for when we post it on the website. And I've been sending it around to everyone in Word document form. But I think that if, before we post it, one of the requirements, I don't know what they all are, but I know they have to go through and look at all the text and images and stuff and convert it. So give them a little bit of time to do that. But then, yeah, that's a good point. We'll get it posted for the next workshop.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, Hannah, this is Bruce DeTerra. Can I make a comment? Hi, I apologize. I don't see a raise my hand option on my screen, just an unmute and a mute.
No worries.
I wanted to provide a little bit of input on the change. And there's the reference to change order is something quite different from changing the scope and what the outputs are going to be from the project. There could be many occasions where you have a change order in a contract or a project in terms of as you're constructing it, you discover unforeseen things and you have to have a change order in order to deal with that. but something in a construction contract that would be kind of an unacceptable, I believe, change order might be where you were going to build a bike ped facility and you specified in your application that it was going to be concrete for long life, and you changed the material for some reason within that construction contract to asphalt, such that you then lost the long life. That would be a kind of change order that would be unacceptable, even if you provided the same linear miles and bike path width, because the quality of what you're presenting is different. But if it turned out that you had to do different construction processes because you discovered some unanticipated thing there, but you still provided the concrete path, then that would be kind of an acceptable change order. So it's really that the outputs, what it is in the essence that the public funds are purchasing, are consistent with what the application said was going to be purchased. So that.
Okay. Got it. So not all change orders would be considered scope changes, but change orders that significantly impact what was promised with the funds would be considered a scope change, right? That's what you're saying, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. I think when you get into infrastructure projects, you get into lots of situations where there are change orders for a variety of reasons, but you still deliver the project that was promised within the scope, schedule, and cost.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that's like from the commission's perspective, that's what we care about is, are you delivering to the public what you said you were going to deliver with this money? And if you end up being able to deliver even more or better than what you originally thought, then that's great. But if it becomes a problem, that's when we start getting more involved and concerned. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Bruce. Are there any other comments or questions, Kayla?
Hi, Hannah. No written questions, and I'm not seeing any hands raised at the moment.
Okay, great. Well, in that case, I'm going to stay on the line just for a couple more minutes in case anything pops up, but I'll go ahead and end our meeting here. Thank you very much for participating. So Kayla, are we still good on the no questions front?
Yep, I'm not seeing anything come in.
Okay. Do you think that we're okay to end everything?
Yeah, probably. And it looks like we're only down to 27 attendees now, so.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and end it.
All right. Thank you. Okay, thank you.